Hey there, this video is a first impressions of the Canon R6 Mark III. I do want to mention that I got this camera delivered to me about 9 hours ago. So I've been playing with it ever since, but I just wanted to give all of you my first thoughts and impressions about this camera. This video is in no way, shape, or form a review. There'll be more videos to come after I've used this camera more. This video is not sponsored. This camera is not a loaner. I purchased this camera. Now, if you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is Josh, and on this channel, I focus on tutorials and deep dive reviews, and I really want to help all of you get the most out of your cameras. So like I said, there will be future videos about the R6 Mark III, and to me, this is a really interesting release because I was really excited about the C50, which I pre-ordered, and in the time, and still haven't received, and in this time period I've been waiting for that camera to ship, they announced the R6 Mark III and shipped it. So of course, I had to pick it up because this is a camera that I've been really excited about, even since the R6 Mark II came out, and they did a really good job with this camera. So spoiler alert, this camera is awesome. If you want to pick one up, there'll be links in the description. They are affiliate links, and they do help me out quite a bit. So if you are looking to purchase one, please go check those out. And if you do get some value out of these videos, I would really appreciate the support. They don't cost you anything extra to use those, so I really do appreciate that. So anytime I get a camera, literally the first thing I do is I want to go out and shoot with it. I want to see what the images look like on this camera. So I shot 2 different sessions this afternoon. First one, I did some street video in downtown Raleigh where I live, and I used the 7K Opengate in RAW. And then the second session, I did some wildlife stuff and I shot in the compressed codecs. So let's take a look at the 7K Opengate. So all of that was shot in the 7K24 Opengate in RAW light. And I really like the way this looks. It has a really strong image. The colors look great. There's a lot of detail. Of course, this is a 12-bit 7K RAW image. Now, I do want to mention that my computer definitely struggled a little bit playing this back, and I have a maxed out M1 Mac Studio. Canon RAW Lite, and a lot of these cameras, like the 7K and 8K cameras, they're really hard for computers to play back. So unless you have a super beefy computer, you might have to expect, using proxies, lowering the resolution in your timeline. I was doing a lot of rendering in place just so I could get it to play back. And if you start adding noise reduction, color grades, and multiple layers, it's gonna struggle. So just keep that in mind, and the file sizes are really big. Now, I did shoot all that in Opengate, and if you're unfamiliar with what Opengate is, these cameras, these hybrid photo cameras, they have a sensor that's 3:2 in terms of the aspect ratio. But when you shoot video, you're shooting 17:9 or 16:9, and usually it crops the top and the bottom off. But in this case, you get the full sensor readout, and that is something new for Canon and is super, super cool. Now, there are 3 reasons you might want Opengate. You might have heard a lot of people talking about this. The first of which is reframing for vertical content. You have a lot more vertical resolution. The second one is for anamorphic support because you don't have to crop the sides as much after you de-squeeze the image. And the third one is just a creative choice. And like you saw in those clips, that was all shot in Opengate. I really like the creative aspect of shooting in Opengate 3:2. It's just different. It's fun. a lot more height in certain situations. It can be fun and creative, and really enjoy that. So having that in this camera is really, really cool. In terms of all the color grading, I didn't do anything crazy. I edit and resolve. I did some basic color space transforms and some really simple exposure, contrast, and saturation tweaks. I didn't push the colors around. I did use the RF 24-70 f2.8 lens for all of that footage, and I was using the IBIS in the camera with the lens stabilization, but there was no stabilization or noise reduction added in post, so you could definitely see what that looked like. Next up, let's take a look at some wildlife footage. I shot all of this in 4K 24 and 4K 60 fine in the XF-AVC 10-bit 422 Intra. I used both full frame and crop mode in C-Log 2. Well, I only tended to go out for like an hour or two, and I wound up hanging out with the eagles quite a bit. That pair lives at the lake near me, and sometimes I see them and sometimes I don't. It was really cool to hang out with them. Of course, all that was shot with my favorite lens, the RF 100-500, and that was all shot on a tripod. I would say the image look great. I don't think it has the sort of weight of the RAW files, but of course they are way smaller, way easier for the computer to edit. And like the previous set of images, there was no stabilization or noise reduction added in post. And the noise reduction in the C-Log 2 profile was set to default, and all that was shot in C-Log 2. So in the menu here, you have a whole bunch of different options in terms of the codecs, frame rates, resolutions, aspect ratios, all that kind of stuff. And when you come in here, there are a few different codecs. So you can choose RAW or RAW Light, which you choose in the other menu. There's the HEVC-S, which is the H.265, and the AVC-S, which is the H.264. Now, if you choose either the RAW or the HEVC, you can enable Opengate, which is what I was just talking about. And you can see here, you can see the little icon with the arrows going up and down. That'll indicate that you are in the Opengate mode. So I'm going to turn that off. And you can also turn on movie cropping here, which adds a 1.6 times crop, as it usually does with Canon cameras. So you can shoot in the 4K fine mode. You can shoot up to 60 frames per second. And if you kick it out of fine mode, you can go up to 120 frames per second. Now, one thing I noticed, which was really weird, was the fact that you can't shoot in crop mode in 4K 120. So 4K 120 on this camera is full frame, but it is line skipped or binned or something. It's not oversampled. It oversamples up to 4K 60. And if you put in crop mode, you can't go up to 4K 120. It's just kind of interesting. I figured it should be able to do that. That's a weird limitation. So I just wanted to point that out. So when you're shooting in RAW, you have a bunch of different options. When you come in here, you can actually go up to 60 frames per second in RAW. And there's also an option for RAW Light, which is a much smaller data size. You can see 970 megabits per second versus 2150 megabits per second in 24 frames per second. And this is, of course, in the non-Opengate mode. So if you set this to Opengate, you can only go up to 30 frames per second. And this is also the case if you are in the HEVC-S. You can see here that you can only go up to 30 frames per second. There is a weird quirk in this camera, which I also recognized in the Canon R1 and probably the R5II, though I can't remember off the top of my head, is that if you are in fine mode, that's the oversampled mode in this camera, and you go into crop mode, when you come back, it does not put you in fine mode. So I'm just going to show you this. So here I am in 4K UHD fine, and if I turn movie cropping mode on, and then I come out of movie cropping mode, you can see it does not put you back in the fine mode. So keep that in mind. If you're going in and out of crop mode, which I do often, you have to go in there and change it back to fine. A quick, easy workaround is just to set up your custom buttons on the top to have one that is in crop mode in whatever mode that you shoot in pretty often. But it's just a weird quirk. I just want to make sure that if you are going in and out of crop mode, you are aware of that. Now I want to go through some of the things I noticed just out shooting, because that's why it's important for me to go out and shoot with the camera. You can actually use false color with the view assist turned on. Now, this was an issue in all of the previous Canon mirrorless cameras that had false color. If you had view assist turned on, you couldn't turn false color on. So that makes it so much better because I use false color all the time. Of course, if you have peaking on, you still can't turn false color on. So just keep that in mind, but at least you can use view assist and see what you're doing and use false color. I also tried out the pre-capture feature, and you can't use false color when you are using pre-capture as well. There are two main monitoring tool options on this camera. There's the histogram, which everyone's used to, but there's also the waveform, which is fantastic. Now, I often use histogram on these mirrorless cameras because I find that when I'm running and gunning, it's easier for me to see than the waveform on these little screens, but totally your preference. And in true Canon fashion here, when you actually hit record, the histogram goes away because, of course, why would you want to know your exposure while you are rolling? Maybe the sun changed or something like that. But the good news is if you come in here and you change this to waveform, you have the waveform here. When you press record, the waveform doesn't go away. So if you need to see the exposure while you're rolling, definitely use waveform. I don't know why the histogram goes away. It's pretty weird. One thing that Canon changed on this camera, which I'm so happy to see and very welcomed, is the updated procedure for getting custom white balance. Now you go in there, you select custom white balance, you aim it at your target, and you press the button, and it gives you a custom white balance. If you ever have tried to get a custom white balance on a Canon mirrorless camera before, you know how much of a pain it was. You had to go into photo mode, take a photo, go back into video mode, import that photo. Now it works more similar to the cinema cameras and the other manufacturers. You just aim it at the target, press the button. So nice to see that. In terms of stabilization, it worked great. I know a lot of people get really worked up about the wobbles in the corners on the wide angle lenses. I didn't go wider than 24 millimeters and you saw the footage. So I didn't get to test that out, but in general, the handheld stabilization was fantastic. I feel like every iteration just seems to get a little bit better, and it pairs really, really well with Canon's stabilized lenses. Like I said, I was using the RF 24-70 and RF 100-500, both of which have great optical stabilization. The autofocus worked great. Again, I just feel like it's a little improvement on cameras that I've used before, like the R5II and the R1. I don't know if it was better, but it just seemed to be working really, really well when I was out doing wildlife. Most of the time I'm doing street video, I use manual focus, but wildlife I use a combination of autofocus and manual focus. And it was even grabbing the eyeball of the hawk in the tree, so that was super cool to see. Really happy with the autofocus, especially for wildlife. The R6 Mark III has pre-record, which is awesome. I love that Canon has just started putting that in all of their cameras moving forwards. Really handy for me personally when I'm shooting wildlife. If I'm waiting for a bird to take off from a branch, I can just set the pre-record on there and it'll pre-record a set amount of seconds ahead of time, which is awesome. Which leads me into the next discussion, which is overheating. Now, I think the thermals in this camera are really good. I didn't do a stress test with it because it's really not that warm out. It is November here in North Carolina. I didn't see any overheat meter warning issued or whatever when I was shooting in the 7K Opengate, but I was turning the camera on and off, and like I said, it wasn't that hot outside. I did see the meter kick on when I was doing pre-record in 4K 60 for like an hour out in the sun. It was probably about 70 degrees Fahrenheit today. It got up to about halfway, but it had been doing pre-record in 4K 60 for a while, and the camera didn't shut down or overheat or anything. So I did have the overheat setting set to high, but yeah, I didn't have any issues with that. But again, you know, I didn't run any tests. I've had the camera for 9 hours and it's not super hot outside. The battery life was fantastic. I shot all of that street video on one battery and most of the wildlife on that battery. I did switch over to another battery towards the end, but the battery life seemed absolutely fantastic on this camera. Now, in terms of low light, I didn't test the camera because I was shooting out during the day, but I just did a quick lens cap test here and then raised up the exposure in post. Now, this camera does not technically have a dual base ISO. It has a base ISO of 800, but we know it has the same sensor as the C50, which has a second base at 6400. So I did want to do a quick test here, and you'll see going from 5000 to 6400, the image definitely clears up and it definitely appears to have an informal second base ISO at 6400, which is no surprise because the C50 has a second base of 6400. In terms of the sensor readout speed and rolling shutter, I didn't really see any artifacts in my footage, but I didn't do any fast-moving stuff. I did hear that it has a pretty good performance in terms of the sensor readout speed, especially even that it shoots in 7K Opengate. But it's not going to be amazing because this is not a stacked sensor, but I didn't have any issues with it out shooting the kind of stuff that I usually shoot. I do want to talk about the physical features and design of the camera. Very similar to the R6 Mark II, but I want to point out a couple of things. First of all, I love this whole upper right-hand section of the camera. I love where all the buttons and dials and everything are. They feel good. They're easy to work. I love the on-off switch here. It's really easy to operate while you're holding the camera with the grip. The grip feels absolutely amazing, as most Canon cameras do. It has this dial here, and I actually really do prefer this over like the R5 Mark II. I know the R5 Mark II has that screen, but I never looked down on that for settings. This is more tactile and easier for me than to push the button, look at the screen, flip it over, and again, I can just quickly switch from manual mode to C1, C2, C3, as I usually program those for when I'm doing wildlife. And one thing I do want to point out is it does have SNF mode, which is absolutely fantastic. That's a huge feature, slow and fast mode. So you can shoot at a higher frame rate and slow it down in camera or vice versa. So I love slow and fast mode, and the slow mode is for doing time lapses. That's something I desperately miss from the cinema cameras and the mirrorless cameras. So really happy to see that. It didn't come with the waterproof hot shoe cover that you get on like the R5 II or the R1. So maybe this camera isn't as weather resistant as those cameras. I'm not sure. The photo video switch they continue to put on the left hand side. I know a lot of people complain about this because if you are, for example, shooting wildlife and you're holding the camera up like this and you have your hand on the lens, you have to then take your hand off to switch it. So it's a personal preference thing. I think most people have complained about it, but I've just sort of gotten used to it. The back, really no surprises here. Pretty much a standard Canon camera. It does have, I believe, the same or similar LCD and EVF as the R6 Mark II, but slightly worse quality than the R5 Mark II. I didn't have any issues out shooting. It was plenty bright. The screen is a little bit smaller, which is kind of a bummer, but it is what it is. It is a 6 series camera. It does have this rate color button here, and it is by default set to open up the color profiles. I just changed this out to toggle pre-capture on and off. That's just what I wanted to do. Onto the ports and everything, pretty standard here. We do have a full-size HDMI port, which is awesome to see. Not all the cameras are coming with those, and it's really glad that Canon finally just went for full-size HDMI. Bottom, not much to report here. Normal battery. One thing that I love is that it does have a CF Express B card. The R6 Mark II had 2 SD cards. My C80 has 2 SD cards. I love CF Express B. They're cheaper media than the V90s, and they're more robust, and they're way faster to unload, and you can record higher bit rates on them and everything, so really happy to see that. Overall, though, I don't think there's really too much else to report about it. Feels great. Kind of if it's not broke, don't fix it kind of thing. Overall, pretty happy with it. So as I've been rambling on for probably way too long about this, especially for a first impressions video, but I do have a lot to say as I've personally used and owned pretty much every Canon mirrorless and most of the cinema cameras in the last 5 or 6 years. So I was really looking forward to trying out this camera. Basically, this camera does pretty much everything, and it does it pretty well. I didn't really get a chance to look into the dynamic range, but you saw the images. There was a good amount of dynamic range there, and the C-Log 2 is pretty easy to edit. You can shoot Opengate, you can shoot internal RAW, has good stabilization, autofocus. It probably takes great photos, although I don't, as you know, I don't really take many photos. Yeah, I would, at this point, you know, if you think you might want to get this, I don't think you'd be disappointed. I know there's gonna be a lot of questions about this versus the C50. When I get the C50, I'll have to figure out what the differences are, but I haven't put my hands on a C50 yet. Anyways, I've been rambling for way too long. Again, if you're looking to pick one up, check out the links in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.